I am joined now by David Curtin. David Curtin is a commentator. He's a leader of the Heritage Party. And from next week, the newest presenter on today's News Talk. Hello, David. Good morning.
Hello, Sonia. Good morning to you. Bright and early.
Bright and early indeed. So you'll be joining us, David. How exciting. The changes at TNT are incredibly exciting at the moment. It's like things are just bubbling up so much. So what should we expect from your show?
No, I'm so excited to be joining. I mean, this is going to be, for me, a great step up. You know, I've been used to being a guest on many shows, but I'm going to be a presenter now. So I'll be looking at the latest in news and culture and seeing how things are happening and developing. And, you know, obviously we've got so many crazy things happening that we need to fight about this. And we need to keep talking about what's happening and the reasons behind this, and also try to come up with solutions and answers and ways that people can get involved and get active in just restoring sanity to our nation and our world. So I'll be looking at that from all different angles, obviously, you know, with regard to what's happening in the news on the day.
It's a funny state of affairs when our aim, and mine is exactly the same, is to restore sanity to our world. I mean, it literally half the time feels like we're living in some sort of set of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, right?
Right, I know people say this, you know, some people go so far as to say, are we living in a simulation? I mean, I don't think that myself, but I can see why some people are asking the question, because there is so much insanity going on. I mean, you know, the whole transgender thing, for example, is something I've been speaking about for, you know, 7 or 8 years ago. But 20 years ago, no one would have even considered this. But now you have the leader of the Labour Party can't even give a straight answer to what a woman is, you know, so this is just one of many, many things where it's almost like 1984, where, you know, the big brother tells Winston Smith, you know, how many fingers am I holding up? He's actually holding up 4 fingers, and he says, got to say 5. No, this is 5, not 4. And you're just expected to deny reality and affirm delusions and unreality. And this is happening all over the place. And I could never believe a few years ago that this would be happening in the UK, in Great Britain, you know, the place where we say this is a free country. But I don't think anyone today would say, well, this is a free country anymore, because our freedoms are being taken away, and we're being required to do all kinds of things and obey all kinds of regulations, which are really inimical to the human spirit.
Absolutely. And, you know, as they said, it is very dystopian, isn't it? It's this whole idea that the final command is to ignore the evidence of your eyes. Well, thankfully, David, you've never done that. And, you know, you and I've talked with you many times, and, you know, I've always said to you that even though you are a politician as well as a commentator, I've always found you to be very honest and straightforward. And that is not something that I can apply to the vast majority of politicians. So on that note, let's talk about some interesting news. Obviously, the story that is blowing up everywhere is to do with Tucker Carlson's interview with President Putin. And even the lead up to it, there were meltdowns all over. Journalists like beside themselves at the idea that a journalist might want to interview somebody who's at the center of many discussions. Did you find the response odd from journalists?
Oh, shock horror. A journalist goes to interview someone. This is what they should be doing all the time. This is what we should have been doing from the very beginning. And but instead, what happened was Western governments banned anybody from actually even watching RT, which used to be on, you know, all of the satellite channels you can receive in the UK. And that happened across the Western world. And then said, essentially, you know, that you mustn't have contact even with certain people who are in the Russian government, Russian citizens, Russian businessmen, whatever. But I think it's fantastic that Tucker Carlson has gone over there. He tried to do it before, I think, but then there were threats against him, and sort of he didn't do that a few months ago. But now he's gone and done it, and he's gone to interview President Putin. And it's unbelievable, the meltdown from some of the people in the mainstream media, Hillary Clinton and others, you know, and saying, oh, you've got to be careful because this is disinformation, when we know that Western governments and the Western mainstream media have been putting out disinformation and misinformation for the last 4 years at least, about one thing after the other after the other. So
Yes.
really, I think that these people are just, complete hypocrites, but they don't even see their own hypocrisy. But the good news is that most people in the world can see through it. And this looks like it's going to be the most watched interview of the year, if not the decade, which is fantastic.
Well, it's huge. It's significant. It was launched late last night in the UK, by which point I was asleep, given the early start of my day. And but I did watch about 3/4 of it this morning, and I found it absolutely fascinating. So it started, I'm not going to give away too many clues here, but it started with a history lesson involving the borders of Russia, Hungary, Ukraine, and actually Putin made a compelling story for his position. He also showed himself to have a good sense of humor. He started off the interview asking Tucker Carlson whether he was there to interview him or to make a show. But it was really, really good humor. And one of the things that he revealed, which I thought was very interesting, was he talked about when Bill Clinton was at the Kremlin, and he'd said to Bill Clinton about Russia joining NATO. And Bill Clinton said, that shouldn't be a problem. This is obviously when Bill Clinton was still the president. And Bill Clinton was like, that shouldn't be a problem. And then later at dinner, Clinton said he'd talked with some people and that would not be possible. And so what Putin was really saying is that a lot of the fight back, it has America absolutely involved. We know it's America's proxy war. We know this. And but he was saying it was about the issue of borders and about how it had been long considered that Ukraine was an artificial state that was shaped at Stalin's will. So tell me some of your thoughts about it.
Yeah, absolutely. I've watched about the first quarter of it where he was doing the history lesson part of it, and I've also looked at various headlines. It's very interesting to see how different media outlets are spinning this in a completely different way. I mean, you've got one headline that says Putin is not interested in World War III, he's not interested in invading Poland and Latvia, and another headline from another media outlet says Putin will start World War III if US bases troops in Ukraine. So you've got complete different twists and spins on this from the same interview. But, what I found fascinating just from the first half hour of listening to it is he was very, very thorough. And he was doing something, which we don't get very often in Western media, is that someone is willing to sit down for 2 hours and go through and explain things very, very thoroughly. And
Yes.
we're just used to getting sound bites. Everything is compressed into 10 or 20 seconds, and that you don't get the real feel for what someone says. You don't get all the nuances. So it's fantastic to be able to see that.
It absolutely is. Let us just park that there a second. We're going to go to Matt Boylan with the news headlines. We're going to be straight back discussing the Putin and Carlson interview.
I got a news flash for you.
Newsflash! TNT Radio News.
Matt Boylan here with a look at your TNT headlines. US President Joe Biden has called a rare late-night press conference at the White House, defending his mental capacity and his ability to run the country.
Because I'm the most qualified person in this country to be President of the United States and finish the job I started.
Donald Trump is another step closer to securing the Republican presidential nomination after winning the Nevada caucus. And Russian President Vladimir Putin has told Tucker Carlson that he has no intentions of attacking NATO.
Are you enjoying listening to TNT Radio? Do you think we're doing a good job? Then please let us know. Why not leave us a like or a positive review or comment on Facebook, Gab, or Getter? Help us get the word out as we cover the biggest topics of our time on today's News Talk, TNT Radio.
Oh, yes, people indeed are happy that David Curtin is joining today's News Talk TNT. James Henry House says, big up David Curtin. At last, someone with common sense and integrity in equal measure. James, I agree with you, but what do you mean at last? And Jules says, journalists, I use the term very loosely. Enraged the journalist seeks both sides of a story. Hilarious, really. So the thing is, David, we were just discussing about the disparity in the headlines, how one headline is portraying him basically, still as a sort of warmonger who doesn't want peace. And another is, saying, oh, he does. But the fact is, he said very, very clearly, he offered peace. He said that the war would be over in weeks if the US stopped giving weapons to the Ukraine. And his biggest concern, and this is something that I think people need to really understand, he said he is very concerned about the Nazification of the Ukraine. It's modeled on Nazi Germany. He wasn't prepared to work with that. And every time that we say to people, there's Nazis in Ukraine, they're like, oh, no, don't say that. These are victims. People can't bear the thought of that, can they?
Yeah, well, there's complete inconsistency in the Western mainstream media about this, because between 2014 and 2021, there were all kinds of stories about neo-Nazis in Ukraine. Ukraine's got a far-right problem. But as soon as the special military operation started, as Putin calls it, in February 2022, it was like, no, there's no Nazis there. And then, well, there may be a few, but they're good Nazis. You know, really, the cognitive dissonance is off the scale. But this is true. And we see it. We saw the Azov battalion. They're well known. I mean, there was a whole film about this, Ukraine on Fire, and it was all about this happening and the rise of, you know, real neo-Nazis in Ukraine. So obviously he's very, very concerned about that. And I think he's also concerned about NATO expansion into Ukraine. And he said that at the beginning. And, you know, as I've said, and you've said, and many other people who are actually watching this and actually know the history of Ukraine, going back to 2014, going back to the 1990s, maybe even going back, you know, even before that, have said that this could have been stopped if we'd have just got round the table and talked peace and not tried to expand NATO up to the borders of Russia, including Ukraine with the Zelensky regime and the neo-Nazi battalions that are there. I mean, it was common sense. The other thing that I think is I've mentioned before, which is very disturbing, is that Putin and Zelensky talked peace. They went to Turkey in April 2022. They arranged a peace deal, and the next thing you know, Boris Johnson has flown out to talk to Zelensky, and then the peace deal is scuppered. And then Zelensky's like, no, we're not making peace. Now, Putin's accused Boris Johnson of being the one that did that scuppered the peace deal. Johnson's denied it. You know, so I don't know what they actually said behind closed doors, but it's very, very obvious that, you know, he went over there, and that is coincidental with the continuation of war and the escalation of war. So, you know, the government that we have in this country, in my opinion, has got blood on its hands. And, you know, there's a case for bringing that to the International Court of Justice, for example. So we need to take this very seriously and look into this. But what we need to do as well is make sure, if there's another chance of peace, that we don't scupper it this time, that we actually, you know, pursue this, because 500,000 Ukrainians have died. And they're the ones who have suffered most, because they're being picked up in press gangs now and sent to the front line as cannon fodder. And, you know, if we care about Ukraine, if we really care, we will want to stop this war as soon as we possibly can.
Yes, absolutely. As he said, we did not start this war in 2022. This is an attempt to stop the war that Ukraine started in 2014. And just to say, David, if it's a choice of whom do I believe, Boris Johnson or President Putin, it would be President Putin every time, because Boris Johnson is a proven compulsive liar. And we know that for fact. So let me move on to the next story with you. This I found extremely, extremely disturbing. And by the way, I absolutely say go watch that interview. Absolutely worth it. So this extremely disturbing story is a consequence of freedom of information requests to 45 police forces in England and Wales, and found that 553 children were arrested for gun crimes last year. This is really disturbing, some as young as 11, David. What were your thoughts about this story?
Yeah, I mean, it goes with that. That's a raw statistic. But what it also says is that's a 25% increase on the year before. So this is a problem that's getting worse. And this is very disturbing, because we do know that there are gangs now that target children because they're easy to manipulate. And some of the gangs, you know, this was postulated in that report, that possibly that they are targeting children and getting them to start using firearms and getting involved in gun crime, and using that to carry out crimes, to carry out theft, or to, you know, enforce what they're doing with the activities of the gangs that they're involved in. Now, the other thing on that, you know, to mollify that a little bit, it says firearms offences. So I don't think that it doesn't say yet if anyone has actually fired a gun who's a child and killed somebody. But if it's an increase, if there's an increase in children between 11 and 18 having guns, the question is, how on earth are they getting the guns, and how long is it going to be until they actually do start using them and shooting and killing people? So I think this is something that we need to nip in the bud before it gets any worse.
It's some pretty horrendous stuff. I've interviewed people to do with the county lines drug dealing, and it is really, really scary. As you say, young children are used. These children are like mules. They're literally moving from the smaller towns and villages, you know, into the cities to sell the drugs on behalf of the sort of overlords and everything. But it really is very disturbing indeed, because these are children. Whatever happened to childhood? Do we have such a problem with family and home life that so many children are just falling under the net constantly? We know we have a problem with families staying together. I myself was a single parent, and I know that there are issues attached with that. Thankfully, I had a village in the shape of my brothers and sisters helping me raise my daughter, and so that can really make all the difference. But some of these children who are growing up, David, they don't hardly even have one parent properly in the home. So these are real problems that we have to tackle at root level, right? It's not just a case of issuing freedom of information requests and finding out that these young kids are armed, but what is happening in their home that makes them turn to these gang environments in the first place?
Yeah, well, every child is an individual, so everyone will have their own individual situation and story. But, you know, what's happening generally is, as you say, there is huge family breakdown in this country. And, you know, these gangs target vulnerable young children who don't have a father in the home, maybe don't have a father and a mother, have neither. They target children who are in care. And because they're easy targets, they're vulnerable, and they're probably, because of the instability of their home life, they're probably, you know, some of them might already be getting into, you know, inclining towards misbehavior and criminality anyway, because, you know, as we sort of, people say, you know, when someone doesn't have a father in the home, especially teenage boys, they look for a father figure. They really need that at the age of 12, 13, 14, 15. And then gangs come along and they offer that, but there's a price to pay. They're not loving, caring fathers. They're just people who take that role in a horrible, twisted way and then use these children for their own ends. But the children, they're not, their minds are not developed. You know, like someone who's a 30, 40-year-old who can see through this. They're growing up, they're emotionally unstable, and they're easily swayed, some of them. So there is a huge issue, and we need to do far more to support families, to change the culture, change the whole culture to, you know, re-establish that the family is the bedrock of the nation, and it's something which is absolutely necessary to bring up children well.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more, ladies and gentlemen. This has been David Curtin, who is the newest recruit to today's News Talk TNT. You will see him from next week, and I will be back shortly. Thank you for joining me today, David. Great to hear from you as ever.